daily news program from Worldling TV presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. Just moments ago, U.S. President George Bush gave a speech to the leaders of the U.S. Coast Guard. He said that the coalition forces managed to control most areas in southern and northern Iraq, adding that the Allied forces prevented the Iraqi president from bombing most of the oil fields. Bush also said that he believes that the coalition forces are close to reaching Baghdad and achieving victory.
Yet we will use all our power to keep.
Meanwhile, Baghdad was bombarded by air raids, where 10 missiles were dropped on the city, and at least one missile hit the presidential complex. Earlier today, there were air raids on Baghdad, targeting main government buildings in the city center, as well as other targets at the outskirts of the city. Meanwhile, loud explosions were heard coming from tanks. Additionally, fighter planes flew over Baghdad at a low altitude, while a presidential palace used by Saddam's son, Uday, was bombed several times. A bloody battle occurred near the city of Najaf between the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division and the Iraqi Republican Guard. These new battles are occurring while U.S. troops are resuming their advancement toward Baghdad after pausing for several days. Furthermore, the city of Al-Nasiriyah was subjected to a number of air raids, targeting a number of locations belonging to the Iraqi resistance. Then, they entered the city of Al-Shatra. The U.S. attack on Al-Nasiriyah was in response to the information they received that Iraqi officials were planning to ambush the U.S. supply line to Baghdad. In the past 48 hours, Baghdad was heavily bombed, more than any other day. In the latest wave of attack, 2 missiles hit the presidential complex in the city, resulting in the destruction of the communication center. The Ministry of Information and Iraq's satellite channel were also bombed, interrupting the broadcast transmission for several hours.
Every day, the residents of Baghdad have been going to sleep to the sound of explosions. The few of them who could actually sleep woke up to what has become a normal occurrence. Strategic buildings were destroyed as well as residential buildings. Smoke covers the city and horrific sounds of explosions are heard here and there. The communication center was the main target for the B-52 bombers. For the first time, they bombed the same location at the same time. The location was this 6-story center, which in a few minutes was transformed into rubble. Now Iraqis are unable to use their telephones, since all that remains from the ground's telephone communication center is the word ground. Last night could safely be described as the night of attack on the communication centers. Thus, the Iraqi channel was targeted again, resulting in the interruption of the broadcast for about 6 hours. The Ministry of Information also received a generous share of the bombings. It may be that the Americans are trying to silence the Iraqi voice. These continuous attacks were doubled in the past 48 hours, noting that the coalition forces targeted specific locations in Baghdad, paving the way for the American and British soldiers, especially now that they have learned that the Iraqi resistance is more fierce than expected, particularly around Baghdad. The Iraqis residing in Jordan are flocking to their embassy in Amman in order to complete the necessary documents to return to Iraq, to reunite with their families and to defend their country. Officials from the Iraqi side received this as a normal reaction. However, those who planned for the freedom of Iraq are shocked to see such actions.
Since the beginning of the U.S. and British attacks, more than 5,000 Iraqis have left Jordan, returning to Iraq, with a strong desire to reunite with their families and to defend their country.
We are not scared. We've grown up with bullets. We will sacrifice ourselves for our country.
We intend to sacrifice ourselves for Iraq and the Arab world.
I swear, if I had 10 kids, I would sacrifice them all so that America does not come near our home.
The Iraqis responding to the call of their country do not perceive the war against Iraq as a war for freedom. Rather, they view the U.S. troops in Iraq as occupiers.
My whole family is safer with Saddam Hussein.
So you don't think that America will bring freedom and democracy?
No, impossible.
For the sake of freedom, we refuse the occupation. We don't want freedom and democracy to come aboard an American tank. These are the sentiments of the Iraqis living in Jordan. They have been flocking to the Iraqi embassy in Amman to complete their documents in order to return to their country.
Iraq is not easy or insignificant.
Our hearts are aching. We want to get back to our country and prove that they are cowards.
If Bush has a sense of honor, he should implement democracy in his own country, not across thousands of kilometers.
5 Jordanian dinars is the passenger's fee to get from Amman, Jordan to Tribil, Iraq. It is a distance of 375 kilometers. Once in Tribil, the Iraqi authorities will pick them up and deploy them to the battlefields.
We have been trained. Anyone who is certified from the army can immediately pick up his weapon and head to the battlefield without going to training centers.
The Iraqis' goal is set. They are carrying their lives in their hands as they leave Jordan and return to Iraq. The Iraqi ambassador in Amman says that this behavior was expected from the Iraqis.
Historically, Iraqis don't like to migrate from their country. Throughout history, Iraq has been the land to immigrate to. People who have immigrated from the Arab Peninsula and other places. The people of Iraq are civilization builders. Iraq only witnessed periods of decline when civilization were rising or falling. I'm not surprised to see Iraqis returning from all over the world to defend their country. We only have one Iraq.
The Iraqis living in Jordan had no intentions of returning to their country. However, their sense of duty and patriotism was stronger than any danger awaiting them in Iraq. Lina Masharbash for the Madar program, Abu Dhabi Television, Amman.
Egypt called on Monday for a new Iraq peace push in the face of the appalling human tragedy resulting from the fighting there. President Hosni Mubarak made the call, saying all parties must work rapidly for a peaceful settlement which satisfies the will of the international community and preserves the unity, sovereignty and dignity of Iraq. In a meeting with the 3rd Field Army in Suez, Mubarak warned that the campaign against Saddam's regime was liable to inflame world opinion and spark more attacks on US targets. Mubarak said he fears this war will have enormous consequences and lead to an increase in terrorism. As to the Egyptian-Syrian ties, the president said relations between the two Arab governments were long-standing and strategic. Mubarak also responded to repeated demands that the Suez Canal be closed to coalition warships, saying this was not possible under the Constantinople Treaty of 1888. The president also said the passage of ships through the Suez Canal is the right of all states unless Egypt is at war with a certain party. US troops opened fire on a civilian vehicle at a military checkpoint in southern Iraq, killing 7 people and wounding 2, mostly women and children. A Navy Lieutenant Commander Charles Owen said on Tuesday the shooting occurred on Monday afternoon. He said the victims, women and children, were in a vehicle that failed to stop despite at a checkpoint manned by soldiers from the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division at Najaf, 150 kilometers south of Baghdad. Owens added that U.S. troops fired into the passenger compartment of the vehicle after firing a warning shot for the vehicle to stop. 4 out of the 13 passengers escaped unharmed. The shooting came as U.S. forces in Iraq were on an increased state of alert following a self-sacrifice operation, a car bombing attack also near Najaf on Saturday that killed 4 U.S. soldiers. U.S. President George W. Bush said on Monday that U.S.-led forces fighting to disarm and topple Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein are moving closer to victory. Bush was speaking to a crowd of around 1,000 Coast Guard officers and enlisted personnel. Frustrated by media reports that the military campaign has bogged down amid tougher than expected resistance and overstretched supply lines, Bush listed a litany of successes for the U.S.-led forces in Iraq. Bush said U.S.-led forces have taken control of most of western and southern Iraq, seized key bridges, asserted their domination over Iraqi skies, and have begun delivering tons of what he called humanitarian aid to Iraqis. He added that U.S. military action has thwarted plans to destroy Iraq's oil fields and taken over Iraqi missile launch areas. Directing a message to Iraqis, Bush said the U.S. forces will end the reign of what he called the oppressors and bring food and medicine and a better life to Iraqis. An Iraqi military spokesman announced on Monday that at least 54 U.S. and British soldiers have been killed in fighting in the previous 24 hours alone. He said most of them were killed in the south of the country. Earlier in the day, Iraq's Information Minister Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf said Iraqi forces have killed 43 U.S. and British soldiers in 36 hours of fighting. In his statements, al-Sahaf also said the Iraqis have shot down 4 Apache helicopters, 2 Predator drones, and killed 43 U.S. and British soldiers. The information minister added that 13 coalition tanks, 8 troop transports, and 6 armored cars had also been destroyed by Iraqi forces. He also reported that between Nasiriyah and Duwayniyah, to the north, the Iraqis discovered that the enemies were occupying shelters where they had placed tanks and troop carriers, adding that 3 or 4 of those shelters are now under siege. The Iraqi information minister also accused coalition forces of killing any civilian under the pretext it could be a suicide attack. Sahaf also said the US and Britain were using fiberglass bombs to attack electricity plants, cutting off supplies and causing damage which needed lengthy repairs. Finally, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell has asked to meet 3 top European Union officials in Brussels on Thursday for discussions expected to focus on Iraq. EU diplomats said on Monday Powell requested to see EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana, European External Relations Commissioner Chris Patten, and Greek Foreign Minister George Papandreou. Officials in Washington said earlier that Powell intended to travel to Brussels and the Turkish capital Ankara this week for talks on the campaign against Baghdad. And EU diplomats said Powell would meet all 15 EU foreign ministers as well as other foreign ministers from NATO member states during his visit.
Day 12 and Baghdad came under renewed bombardment early Monday from US and British warplanes. A pall of smoke was seen rising from Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's presidential palace on the banks of the Tigris River, following at least 8 loud explosions around the Iraqi capital shortly after midnight. US-led forces also launched Monday another missile strike at Iraq's information ministry, which has been used in recent days by the world's media. The Iraqi TV resumed its broadcast after a 10-hour stop due to the strike against the ministry.
The Royal Air Force crews are working around the clock in the US-led aggression against Iraq. Harriers and Tornadoes based in Kuwait are providing 24-hour backup to British and United States troops. The extent of the damage done to Baghdad's Ministry of Information was revealed on Monday morning. U.S. Tomahawk missiles targeted the ministry before dawn, setting the building on fire for half an hour before it was put out, after the building was damaged in the first strike on the site. Foreign journalists who were housed in a press center on the ground floor of the ministry have moved out, and the authorities have opened a media center in a hotel. Just after midnight, at least one missile had slammed into the presidential compound in central Baghdad. A pall of smoke was seen rising from the palace on the banks of the Tigris River after the strike, following at least 8 loud explosions around Baghdad and the roaring of warplanes and anti-aircraft fire. More blasts were reported at around 2:40 a.m. and later at dawn. In recent days, coalition bombings did not spare residential areas.
This savagery is inflicting Iraqis in their homes and public markets. These are the humanistic deeds they promised us.
Why did they destroy this house? What's the aim of the American president? I would like to ask, where's the clean war he brags about in press? Where are the smart missiles which do not harm civilians? Where are the human rights he talks about? He is a failure, no doubt. We will win.
Nothing but what God wants befall us. We are martyrs to be for the sake of our nation. We do not care what they do with us. We will end up in heaven and they in hell. Bad luck is theirs.
After another night on the attack, life in Baghdad continues. People ventured out from their homes and shelters to buy food. Others began clearing the rubble, and the low volume of traffic on the streets of Baghdad moves freely. Meanwhile, an Algerian medical aid mission arrived in the Iraqi capital on Monday with medical relief for victims of the bombing campaign on Baghdad.
This is an operation of unity between the Algerian and the Iraqi brothers. We have brought with us a team of doctors, general practitioners and surgeons to look at the needy wounded. And also we are presenting gifts of medicines with the help of the Jordanian authorities.
Abbas added that this is the first medical team to be followed because he said with grief that the wounded and people suffering burns need a lot of help.
The encircled southern Iraqi city of Basra was again rocked today by US and British bombardments. The bombing raids came as British forces launched a major assault to secure a suburb in the city. The British Defense Ministry said one of its soldiers was killed and several others were injured during fighting on the outskirts of Basra. According to Group Captain Al Lockwood, a British military spokesman, UK forces are focusing their strategic efforts on cutting the lines of communication between Baghdad and Iraqi troops in the field.
British forces have surrounded Basra but have not entered it, hoping it can be wrested without the need to engage in street-to-street fightings. The battle for Basra is gaining pace after hundreds of British Royal Marines launched a major assault to secure a suburb southeast of Iraq's southern capital on Sunday. Some 600 men from 40 Commando attacked Abu al-Khasib in the first all-out assault by a full commando since the Falklands War in 1982, and the operation was due to continue on Monday. But the Iraqis in the Basra region counterattacked later in the day, and 3 Iraqi patrol vessels attacked a Royal Marine landing craft on the Basra Canal some 30 kilometers to the south. The British craft was hit and set alight by a rocket-propelled grenade, and 4 of its crew were reported injured. For his part, Iraqi commander in southern Basra, Walid Hamid Tawfiqi, said 4 British soldiers were killed during the Abu Khasib battle southeast of Basra. He also denied that the British forces captured an Iraqi officer in the area. Meanwhile, members of the Irish Guards, a British Army regiment who have been manning a checkpoint south of the city, came under fire from Iraqi mortars. The city has been subject to intense US and British bombing. In the shelling, a government building was hit and a kindergarten school was severely damaged, and civilian casualties were mostly women and children. The random bombing also hit and destroyed civilian houses and animal ranches and increased the sufferings of those who remained unharmed by killing their animals. The situation as a whole is in sharp contrast to Western expectations. The US and British administrations convinced their troops that people in the south would welcome them and might even join them in their southern battles. Instead, people and Basra are focusing their fury and anger on the US and British invaders of their land, killing their children and storming into their houses, disregarding any privacy. In another Iraqi central town, Sharat, US Marines and Iraqi forces traded artillery fire overnight as Americans launched bombing strikes on the town on Monday. Iraqi resistance continued as well around the strategic southern Iraqi city of Nasiriyah, where one of the US Marines was killed on Sunday. Marines around Nasiriyah claim to have discovered decontamination vehicles as well as hundreds of chemical warfare suits and gas masks, as well as different kinds of ammunition. US military also claimed on Sunday to have killed around 100 Iraqis and captured another 50 at Najaf and Samawa. In the meantime, some 20,000 troops from the US 3rd Infantry Division are concentrated near the Euphrates Valley town of Najaf and were preparing a push in a few days. And further east, near Al-Qut, more than 5,000 Marines had dug in amid expectations the drive to the capital was still weeks away.
On the northern front, the US-led aggression continued on Monday with the pounding of Iraqi positions by giant B-52 carpet bombers. As a result, Kurdish forces are now slowly advancing on the northern Baghdad-controlled oil city of Kirkuk. Meanwhile, US forces said they had captured a camp in northeastern Iraq for the Ansar al-Islam group.
For the third night running early Monday, US-led B-52s bombarded Iraqi positions near the demarcation line between Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq and the region dominated by Iraqis. The bombardments, which were heard in the Kurdish town of Kalak, some 40 kilometers east of the city of Mosul, began shortly after midnight local time. Following coalition bombing late last week, Iraqi forces abandoned several positions on the demarcation line around Sham Shamal and Koshtapa in the center, allowing Kurdish forces to advance on the northern Baghdad-controlled oil city of Kirkuk. The 15-kilometer advance by the US-backed Kurdish Peshmerga was slowed by dense minefields left by Iraqi troops. It was a third significant shift in the front line, separating Iraqi forces from the US-backed Kurds. Occasionally, US gunships dropped leaflets addressing the Iraqi troops in which it informed them of the ways on which they can hear the US calls demanding they give in. These two elderly men and women, along with this young girl, are among the very few who decided to stay in Kalak, originally a deserted village. The majority decided to leave for more secure places. Meanwhile, US forces and their Kurdish allies said they have captured a camp in northeastern Iraq for the Ansar al-Islam group that US officials insist has links to Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda network. The camp had been pummeled from air for several days before US troops, aided by Kurdish forces, entered the compound located in a Kurdish-controlled area near the border with Iran, according to General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. An undisclosed number of camp defenders, described by Myers as most likely Al-Qaeda members, have been killed during the operation, while others have been captured.
U.S. Marine reinforcements left Camp Patriot in southern Kuwait on Sunday to bolster coalition troops fighting in Iraq. A further 3,300 Marines left for the battlefields after spending the previous 3 days unloading equipment and supplies from the USS Nassau anchored off the coast. The U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division is also being sent to the region. Its first supplies expected to arrive in Kuwait within days. US-led forces have mounted several air raids on the northern Iraqi city of Mosul, and explosions were heard again around the city. The latest airstrikes against Mosul hit the outskirts of city late Sunday, and Iraq's third city, home to 1.7 million people, has been a focus of night bombing by the coalition in recent days as part of the campaign in the oil-rich north of Iraq. Homes were destroyed and civilians were injured in the raids and are being treated in local hospitals. Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz said the coalition forces invading his country will continue to be targeted by self-sacrifice bombers. He said people who are being threatened by an invasion have the right to fight by all means to defend themselves. Aziz welcomed those from outside the country who wanted to be martyred in the war with the coalition forces.
The question of terrorists, when you fight an invader, by whatever means available to you, you are not a terrorist. You can end this war when the invaders withdraw totally and unconditionally from the Iraqi territory.
Relentless U.S.-British air raids pounded Baghdad, targeting government buildings in the city center and positions on the outskirts of the Iraqi capital. 3 huge explosions struck the Iraqi capital this afternoon after heavy overnight bombardment that caused more deaths, injuries, and severe damage to various installations. On the 12th day of the war, U.S. combat units said they closed to within 80 kilometers south of Baghdad, battling Republican guards and other Iraqi units for a bridge over the Euphrates River at Hindiya between Karbala and Hela. Similar U.S. and British offensives took place in the north and south of the country. Ali Touqan sums up the latest developments of the U.S. and British aggression on Iraq.
Iraqis survived another night of fierce bombardment in the capital, followed by a series of major explosions in and around Baghdad and elsewhere as the U.S.-led war on their country entered day 12. But Iraq remained defiant, vowing to turn the desert into a grave for invading U.S. and British forces if they do not retreat. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was shown on state television holding a cabinet meeting attended by his 2 sons Qusay and Uday. This is the first time Uday appears on television since the start of the war on Iraq. Iraqi Foreign Minister Naji Sabri threatened that it was best for the coalition forces to surrender as soon as possible in order to avoid more human and material losses.
We shall turn our desert into a big graveyard for American and British soldiers.
Today's death raised the U.S. casualty toll in the war to at least 46, with another 17 missing. Britain said it lost 25, but claimed that only 5 of them were killed in action, while 15 in accidents and 5 in friendly fire. Day 12 is almost over, and still there is no sign of the alleged weapons of mass destruction, but only signs of further suffering to the Iraqi people as they await yet another day of bombing. Ali Touqan, Jordan Television.
The heavy air bombardment of Iraqi cities came after reports that ground operations were halted in some areas. British ground troops south of Basra, who are waiting to enter the city, have angrily responded to observations that their efforts have stalled. British tanks remained around Basra's edge as residents said they can withstand the U.S.-British siege for months. Their confidence has raised questions over how long the troops can stay on the outskirts before launching an offensive. Although some soldiers are happy for doing nothing, others lashed out at their politicians.
Well, I'm certainly not the only one who's getting annoyed just sitting still now. But if politicians want to come out and fight it for us, then let them crack on. If they're saying it's not going fast enough, well, it's not our fault.
She was at home in the furthest room from the explosion. She heard the explosion. Her daughter was sleeping in the living room. She came to see her. When she got there, a piece of shrapnel hit her directly to the back of her neck. How were you hit, dear? You were hit by the plane, right? By a plane?
Yes.
We vow to support the honorable leader and President Saddam Hussein. May God protect and help him. That we remain loyal to him till the last drop of our blood and the last beat of our hearts.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin,